All right. Well, hopefully you saw my American flag in the background for Veterans Day. I wanted to kick this off. Um, I am not patriotic at all when you look at my office, you know. I've got, you can see right here, I got my two sons who are active in the Army. My dad was a World War II vet, so were my uncles, and so Veterans Day is a big deal in the Barton household. I hope you guys take a moment and reflect on that. I'm sure you do. You're all good people. And man, we've been given a lot of good stuff. Albeit imperfectly, it's still a crap ton of really good stuff. And hope we're always have some gratitude for that. Okay, let's get after it. Wanted to start off today really quickly with any wins or challenges. Wins or challenges in the last 2 weeks. Come on now. It's been 2 weeks. You've got to have something.
I'm out of my sling for my rotator cuff repair.
How did that go?
Oh,
I
it's
think
a
I need to do
pain.
that eventually, but I'm holding
Oh,
off.
it's a pain. It is a slow go.
I'm sorry to hear that. I had a shoulder replacement and they're not fun.
Mm.
Ooh, that's a whole new level, Clint.
I've got titanium all over my body,
Well,
unfortunately.
you know what? For a guy who has a chromium molybdenum knee, I'll tell you, for the first year, I was not a happy camper. It wasn't good. But here I am 10 years out, and I barely, aside from less flexibility, I rarely have any pain in that knee.
Hey, 4 surgeries later, I can raise my hand finally.
Heyo!
So it's a big deal.
All right, Josh, any wins or challenges in the past 2 weeks? I'm just going to pick on people.
Oh man, you had to ask Josh? Oh man.
Josh, don't listen to Parker. I'll just mute him.
Sounds
Parker's
great.
just intimidated by the sound of my voice.
So yeah, probably two deals. So I had a neighbor reach out to me. I had spoken with them a couple months back, just as they were passing my house, and they had remembered our real estate conversation. They had asked about the market, and I said, "Yeah, that's." I explained to them 30-second quick synopsis of the market, and I said, "Are you guys interested in buying, selling, or investing in real estate in the near future?" And they said no at the time. They contacted me last week and 2 weeks ago actually, and said uh, we'd like to see if you could show us a few homes. And I said, okay, what's the story? So sat down with them, and they need to sell their home in order to buy a home, and they would like me to do it. So the reason they didn't use
Oh
their previous
man.
realtor is because their previous realtor went to a builder, and she said, oh, you know what? I just don't represent clients anymore that are not through the builder. Whether the builder doesn't allow that or not, I'm not sure, but that was the reason for not wanting to use her. I had another listing, actually, clients that I haven't shown them any homes yet, but we had signed a buyer broker agreement to go look at homes, and they're from out of state, but they just weren't able to go that one day. So we already had a buyer broker in place, and they reached out to me 2 nights ago, and the husband said, "Hey, Josh, we found a lot out in Elkridge," and they asked us. We found it, but we told them we had a realtor, and we would like to move forward with it. Are you willing to discount your commissions just a bit? Because obviously we found the lot, and they were going to discount it for us if we didn't if we didn't bring a realtor. And I had only signed the buyer broker agreement for a specific property, so I did not have any other buyer broker agreement with them. So they had no connection and no requirement to use me as the buyer's agent. And so I felt it was very kind of them to reach out to me and obviously because we've talked and had conversations, there was a level of trust there that they felt that they felt like they were going to get a useful benefit from using me, right? And so we are writing up the contract this morning. We're going to send it over to the builder, or the builder's agent, I should say, and that'll be an easy deal that will close here in 30 days.
That's awesome. I probably couldn't have asked for a better win to touch on some topics. So, well, I know you've been we've had some discussions, and of course it's been an emphasis in the company to make sure we're prepared when somebody asks, the golden question or some version of it, that we can actually stack some value there, and without arrogance and being that annoying type of realtor, but just be like, for lack of better terms, I'm actually good at what I do and I will bring value to the transaction. And I know you do that. And that's why people, even though you had a limited buyer agency agreement, were willing to reach back out. So good job. Good reminder for everybody.
I
So
got
much-
one, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got a couple. I had three closings on Thursday, and three of
Heyo.
probably the toughest.
Wait, where are you taking everybody to lunch?
I know, right? Come on down, let's do it.
I'll be down
Um,
there on Wednesday.
And two of the three Remax associates had both sides. My client sold. The buyer was Marlene Rissman, and the purchase was a Kramer one. And
Wow.
it was extremely difficult to where the buyers for Marlene Rissman, I saw them on Saturday night, and they were very appreciative of how everything went. So that was great. 3 new listings coming today. And yeah, and the big one I thought was really cool.
No wonder
was
you're smiling
I had-
this morning.
What's that?
No wonder you're smiling this morning.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
This one that I'm really keen on is because I had a cabin up in Huntsville. Client wanted it. We did a hard money loan, and last minute the hard money loan pulled out, and I was able to get Brandon from Lifetime to do a rehab loan, FHA. We got it approved and got it switched over about 3 hours before due diligence was up on the cash hard money loan, and
Wow.
we got it done. So my client is super happy, and Brandon's happy, and I'm happy, and it just the teamwork was just phenomenal on that one to get that thing done.
Kyle, I'm not trying to discourage people from participating with the wins, but would you do me a favor and reach out to Aaron Menard and capture a little video just on that? That is such a cool story of how the ecosystem came in clutch and saved a deal. I would love to start putting together a collage, as you guys have these, and this really is a specific ask of you. If you have experiences like that, where either title resolved an issue, Parker, you had one a couple months ago that title went to bat and helped out, and this one, I think it'd be great. Even our home warranty affiliates and stuff like that, I'd like to have on Remax of Utah, AIG success stories, and just be able to start plastering those. So I know it's a little bit of an ask, but it doesn't have to be anything more than this. Just a quick Zoom call and have her capture the video, and she'll doctor it up and cut and splice and make it concise.
Perfect.
Other Josh, sorry, I didn't realize that there was another Josh on the call, so I apologize. All right. Let's see. Since you brought this up, I actually have it on my agenda today. Just a couple of quick hitters on reminders. How many of you did not or were not able to go to the rehab loan training we did? Okay, you weren't there, Kyle?
I was there in the last 20 minutes of it.
Yeah. I just sent the recording to Erin Menard, so she will put it up. If you haven't, it's probably 30 minutes of our training. I would highly suggest you watch that, because you'll be surprised. Most of us know in years past that we had, the FHA 203K loan, and you know what? It's not a bad product, but it was a somewhat hemmed in product. There's only so many things you could do with it. And Aaron Bigelow was the presenter. He's an affiliate with Lifetime, and their company specializes in renovations loan. And I can't remember, I think there were 7 different products that he had on screen, and the flexibility with what you can do with those now. And I'm just a reminder why I was so excited to have him present is because I know, and I hope you guys are trusting me on this. Trust the geek. Inventory is going to get somewhat thinner over the next 6 months. We're already about 25% what our industry norm is, and it's going to get thinner. And so you're going to have more options more tools in your toolbox to help people, find perhaps a house that has good bones, but it's got, the outdated cabinets or countertops. Carrie Moss, if she's still on here, she had one a couple, well, probably 6 months ago that was literally like straight out of the 70s, green countertops, like lime green countertops, and but finding a property like that and being able to paint the vision for somebody. You're training them young, Josh. You're training them young. But being able to go in and be like, listen, don't target fixate on the figuratively speaking, the green countertops. We've got rehab loans that can do this. Or a lot of builders, there's a few down here in Utah County. I know they are elsewhere. They're selling properties with ADUs to help them more affordable. Well, now you've got options to do that on existing homes through some of the renovation loans that Aaron had available. So if you didn't watch it, or if you've forgotten some of it, know it's going to be up today up on the training vault. So good information. All right. We had sales meeting in Pleasant Grove, and we had sales meeting up in Layton, and we will do South Ogden on Tuesday, and then we will be down in St. George on Wednesday. And I don't want to spoiler alert, Aaron Menard showed how easy taking some stats and utilizing KV Core. I'm talking less than like 8 or 9 clicks and having a full campaign going out to your SOI. It was some really useful, meaningful information. I'm going to share my screen here for a second. One of the graphics that we went to, everybody's familiar with this, right? You can come in to utahrealestate.com, go over to stats. So here's your first click. One click. Go over to market summary. 2 clicks.
Can you share your screen?
Am I not sharing it?
Yeah, we can't see it.
Oh, let's try that again. Wow. It is Monday morning, apparently.
It's a Monday. We forgive you.
There we go. So I
Hey,
clicked.
Matt,
Yeah.
we should just how cute Josh's newborn baby is. Look at that kid. Isn't he cute?
He is cute.
Starting them young.
Josh wanted me to say that, by the way.
Yeah. Nice. So if you're on the homepage for utahrealestate.com, you come over to stats and click on rapid stats. It puts you here. So that's after 1 click, you come down, click on market summary. There's 2 clicks. And then on the 3rd click, you've got a marketing piece, right? The point is your marketing piece isn't supposed to be an exhaustive, detailed explanation of all things real estate, but to have some hooks in it to start a conversation with your clients. And so Aaron shows us how quickly we can integrate this into KV Core. I mean, how hard was that? Literally 3 clicks. And if you want to get super, oh, well, I don't want the entire state. I'm just going to, let's do Davis County, right? And just refresh the report. And now your data is targeted to Davis County. And you can get to a city level or a zip code level and have something at the ready, right? So the other thing I wanted to show, and I'm going to have to drag it over here. Give me just 2 seconds. I asked Aaron in our sales meeting, she showed in KV Core. This is something that I wasn't aware of. I mean, I knew loosely that Aaron did a newsletter, but I didn't really understand. Her marketing team does this every month, and it's free. It's already set up, and you can do much the same thing as we were doing with this graphic in KV Core to do this, right? All it is information to really help you stay forefront of mind with your clients, right? And I just look at it. I mean, I get cards from agents since I work with a lot of agents inside and outside the company. I get their, recipe cards, and I get this, that, and the other. But this, suggestions for maintenance. This is really well thought out, and it has a lot of marketing hooks in it. I hope you see that and are kind of excited about that. If you weren't aware of that, it's provided for free and can be woven into your KV Core platform and set up essentially on a monthly or a quarterly campaign, right? We talk about this a lot, and I just feel like I've got to reiterate it here. If you were to put the three most important things in your mind right now as to what makes a successful realtor, what are they? Just rapid fire one if you got one. You're all staying muted. That's cool.
Communication.
Communication skills. Okay. What
Top of
else?
mind.
Who said that?
Market knowledge.
Market knowledge. Yes, Josh. Top of mind. You really, and I think you really just hit all three of them. I mean, literally, and I'm not joking. The fact that you have some market knowledge, which means you're competent and you're bringing something to the table. Forefront of mind, that's the one I'm driving home on. And Don, you're absolutely right, because when we get a property under contract and we're dealing with all the personalities and lenders and title and agents on the other side and brokers on the other side and seller or buyer on the other side, your communication skills and your negotiation skills are paramount. But I want to hone in on that one, forefront of mind. And I don't know what it is. And I'm just telling you this from 18 years as a principal broker, because I get a lot of opportunities to sit down and coach agents, especially when they're a little down, gosh, my business isn't where it needs to be. One of my first questions is always going to be, tell me about your SOI. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the time, I get either a blank stare or a, well, and after the well starts some explanation of why they don't have an organized SOI. And if they don't have an organized SOI, I can pretty much guarantee they're not staying forefront of the mind. Okay. And so that's why I bring this up as a reminder, those two things. If you did nothing else, I hope some people take me up on this. If you do nothing else marketing wise for 2025, then set up either that market summary sheet from Rapid Stats or Aaron's newsletter to go out monthly or quarterly. I would be willing to bet you a nice steak dinner that your business will go up substantially, not like 5%. I'm talking like 50%. It's not because you're not competent. It's not because you don't have good communication skills, but you're dropping one of the key pillars, which is staying forefront of mind. Dan?
Yeah, tomorrow. Oh, I'm like echoey here. Sorry. Tomorrow we're going to do part of the Committed to Your Success class. We're going to do staying in front of your SOI, right? So good little lead in there. Thank you for the promo. But, Aaron's going to be talking about that, how we use KV Core to, enhance our ability to stay in front of folks. So if you want to, get going and execute what the principal broker's advice is, I think tomorrow we're going to get you a game plan to be able to do so.
Is that at 11, Dan?
Yeah.
11?
Yep. Tuesdays at 11.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I'm gonna beat a dead horse. I'm telling you, this is significant in your business. I look who's on the panel here right now, and I'm highly confident that if I put you in front of a client, you're gonna kill it. You're gonna do great. So the missing link is, how come you're not having more conversations? And it comes back, in my opinion, and I think it's backed up by data. And if I interrogated each one of you right now, I'd probably get some answers that verify this, that you're not exceptional right now at staying forefront of the mind with your clients. Some of them are better than others, and others on this call, I'm sure, going, oh, I hope he doesn't interrogate me right now. It'd be embarrassing.
Hey, Matt, can I share something that
Please.
has helped me? So one of the things that I had a lot of fear in calling clients or past clients, and I think a lot of us probably do. But the biggest thing that helps me to overcome that fear is I know that I'm going to be doing a better job for that person if they use me in a real estate transaction or in some way of real estate. And I see so many agents. I think Tom Ferry came out and he said, out of the 1.7 million agents, over 50% of them did 1 to 2 deals in the year of 2023. I don't want my clients, and this is why I call my past clients and stay in touch with them, is I don't want those clients accidentally using one of those agents. And, nothing wrong with the agents themselves, but the quality and the expertise that an agent who's doing 1 to 2 transactions per year versus an agent who's doing 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 transactions per year, that difference of expertise and knowledge and the help they're going to be able to provide to that client is just it's just amazing, right? It's just such a big difference. And I want to make sure that those clients are having a good experience every single time with the right agent.
You bring up such a good point, and I love the way you phrase that, because it's a thing. It really is. I mean, when I was on the MLS board for 10 years, we'd run stats here locally, and I don't know where Tom Ferry's pulling his stats because he is overshooting the mark. We would pull, and it varied between about 47 and 53%, depending on the year, depending on the market, hadn't done any transactions in the past 12 months. Any, not 1, not 2, 0.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it was 0 to 2 transactions, or maybe even 0 to 1. So you're right. You're right on that.
So yeah, and it's unfortunate, right? That there's just certain realities in our industry. The barriers to entry are low, and that means you're right. Some people will get hooked up with an agent, and it's not because, very rarely is it because somebody's really being nefarious or, just trying to do a bad job, but they just don't know. They just don't know. And you guys do. I look at you guys, I'm like, man, people who are sharpening the saw, I love it. So I'm going to share with you one other quick thing, and this time I will actually share my screen. If you go into utahrealestate.com, I'm going to show you one other tool. And this isn't necessarily so much to share with people. It's not directly anyway. It's not digestible. It's not marketing pretty, but I think it's helpful for you as an agent. So if you come over to the stats tab, right, and you go down to the market summary report, it's going to bring you up to this interface. Okay. I like to do segments of about $20,000 because when you lump it into 50,000, it's not quite as meaningful. I'm not really interested in accepting backup offers, nor expireds or canceled, but I am interested in those that are under contract, those that have sold, and those that are active, right? And if we want to restrict this a little bit, we can come down and say, I only want, oops, sorry, wrong one, single family. I'm not going to necessarily on this particular search worry about townhomes and condos. And then, of course, I can, since I'm more familiar with Utah County, I'll do Utah County, and we'll do Springville 519. And just view the results. And if you haven't seen this report before, you'll have 3 big chunks, just like we said: actives, under contracts, and solds, right? And what's cool about this graph is it allows us as a practitioner to very quickly go and size the market. And just to make this have a little more data, I'm going to drop in a couple of other cities, 518 and 511. View the results. So kind of got 3 contiguous towns. And what it does, if you look at the number of listings in this category of active listings, if you look, you kind of see a little bit of a bell curve that develops, right, in your different pricing. The more data you have, the more pronounced it will become. But so for instance, if you're going out, Parker, and you're looking at listing a house and you've done a little bit of a CMA and it's going to be in that 550 to 600 range, right? This is such useful information, I think, like a good snapshot for you to go and speak intelligently to the market, right? And I may just come in and highlight, from 500 to 640, just to kind of show them, well, if you're going to be in that 560, 570 range, we've got about 22 properties competing. The average days on market, the lower the price, less days on market, the higher the price, more days on market. And that's all I had to do to just kind of start sizing the market. Now, I get it. If I want to be more exhaustive, and in a scenario when you're talking to a seller, you probably will have a more detailed CMA, but most sellers and buyers, the way they analyze data starts at the 30,000 foot view. And so this is kind of the 30,000 foot view. And then you can go into a little more detail with your specific CMA. And Dan does a great class on using Core Presents for the CMA. If you haven't watched that, you should. But I can do that for the actives, and I can go do a similar thing for, hey, and by the way, here's the ones that are under contract. And most important, most telling would be, oh yeah, and here's the ones that have sold, right? And this is the last rolling 12 months.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
I love this data, right? And you and I who are analytical, and for those who are, will look at this and just, go crazy, right? Foam at the mouth. For a long time, when I was your buyer's agent, you would say, Parker, most people are visual learners. So find visuals that work for this. So how do we get this data to turn into like a pie chart, right? I guess we could use Rapid Stats, have them create a graph for us, like a pie graph that says, here's a visual of what's actually happening. Because how much of us are getting buyers that are saying, they're looking in that $550 to $600 price range, or $520, $600 price range. And they're like, well, could we beat these sellers up on price? And, that just happens to be the most competitive price range that there possibly is. So if you have a buyer who's looking in the $400 to $500 price range, the answer is we certainly could try. You know what I mean? So I think I think having these types of visuals and these types of numbers to pair with questions are the things that really get us over the hump and make us look more professional.
To be clear, this data I'm showing you on the screen right now is for your processing and consumption, and to round out your knowledge in those 3 cities in that price point. I'm not proposing at all that you show them this data. If I'm going to show them anything, I'm showing them this, right?
Yeah.
Pretty colors, graphs, and with the key things. I mean, is this not some of the same data? Active listings, sold listings, right? So yeah, I just hope you understand. I wasn't proposing that you take this.
No. I totally understood. What I was saying is, it would be cool to take those numbers and put them into some sort of visual.
And you can, there's a graph, button right there on the left there.
Yep.
Yeah, see, that's awesome.
Matt, now that's ugly.
Yeah.
And that is not helpful at all, and that's just going to make people like mentally throw up, because they're like, I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
No, I just use those numbers that you just had. I use those stats all the time. I've used those for years, and I don't have a problem with my clients understanding that. They don't need to be in graph format.
For sure. And here's the thing. If you did a little prep of this and you even just printed out those highlighted areas in the, 50,000 above and below or whatever, your price point, I just have those literally printed out, just so that I have them as talking points when I came in. When they start, you get through the pleasantries, show me the house, whatever your approach is, and you sit down at the kitchen table, as Mike Ferry says, and you start talking, and they get to pricing. It's like, well, listen, what are your motivations, right? We all understand a good listing presentation is focused primarily on questions, not preaching. And so if you start asking the questions like, well, what is your motivation? Why are you selling? How quickly do you need to move to the new place? This data becomes pretty impactful to them. But if you haven't done your homework and you don't have this at the ready, it's a wasted opportunity. And you know what? If you understand, when you do the personality profiles and you realize about 11% of the population has a strong tendency for being analytical. I've said this for years. My wife is squarely an amiable, right? And even an amiable, when they're getting to a critical decision, they at least want to know that somebody has looked at the data. And it's even better if they can take the data and condense it and share with the amiable why it's important for them. That's what this data is about, right? Depending on your motivation, how much you want to get out of the property based on what has sold. I've got some data that will help you analyze that, right? And the net of all of that is you come across as somebody who actually knows their craft, is vested in knowing the numbers, where a lot of agents, no offense, to your comment, Josh, the 50% that have never done a deal come in and be like, well, what do you want to list it at? That's not super helpful, right? If you've done the foundation work and you've asked intelligent questions and you get to what the core motivations are, and you talk specifically about properties that have sold and what's active and what their competition is, your stock is just going up as the pro, right? To the point where I love your example earlier, Josh, even though their buyer broker had was not universal or extensive, the fact that they knew you were already bringing value, they wanted to work with you. So awesome. Great. Okay. Let's jump topics now, if you'll allow me to. I had two things I wanted to cover today specifically on contracts, and I hope you don't glaze over because this is actually pretty significant, you guys. The seller's disclosures. I know that, let me just start off by saying this. The general approach in the industry from my peers, brokers to their agents is, you as the agents don't do anything, right? You let them fill it out because you don't want to take the liability and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? I get it. And right, we should not be writing the things in, but that doesn't mean our fiduciary of reasonable care goes away and we can't help them understand some of the things. Because when the average person in the public starts going through these things, you know, for us, they make perfect sense because we're dealing with this every day. But they hit certain things and either won't pay attention because they don't think it's important, or worse, they don't understand it, right? And so this is the first one that I get all the time. And Savannah, you can vouch for this, and anybody else on here. It's like, well, I didn't live in the property, so I don't have to provide seller's disclosures. Okay, let's stop there for a second. In section 7 of the REPSI, which is a contract between buyer and seller, what does it say? You're going to provide a written seller property condition disclosure for the property. It's a contractual obligation. There's no carve out that says if you didn't live in the property, you don't have to, we're striking this from the contract. Now, can somebody say 7A to be removed from the contract? Can they do that? Yes, they can. Does it remove their obligation under the Real Estate License Practices Act in the state of Utah, which is the law governing real estate, for a seller to disclose what they know about a property? No, it does not. So you can get rid of the instrument or the convenient vehicle, but it still doesn't wipe out your obligation as a seller to disclose whether you've lived in the property or not. So let's make sure we're clear on this. If I bought a property from Dan, when I bought the property for Dan, he gave me seller's disclosures. Am I obligated, if I sell to Josh, am I obligated to tell Josh what Dan disclosed to me, or only what I experienced in the property?
Full disclosure.
What does that mean?
I mean, yeah, if you have data of what's going on or knowledge of what's happened to the property, it's your obligation to disclose it.
Correct. And so I hope you understand why that is just such a ludicrous thing to say, well, I've never lived on the property, therefore I don't have to provide seller's disclosures. You bought it from somebody, or a lot of times this crops up when we have a death in a family, for instance, and the children come to sell the property and like, well, we never lived in the property, so we're not going to provide seller's disclosures. As a good agent who understands the fiduciary reasonable care and heading off potential litigation, what should we be telling them?
Nope, that doesn't work.
Huh?
I would say, no, it doesn't work. I appreciate what you're trying to, matter of fact, I'm dealing with now. There's a property that I'm negotiating with right now that was inherited by a trust. It's a large property. It's really old. There's clearly a lot of problems with it. In the walkthrough, we found black mold in like 5 different places, and I'm talking black. So we were like, wow, this is pretty intense. Seller disclosures. They're like, oh, it's a trust. We don't know. Our dad lived in it. We never lived in it, so we're not disclosing anything. Like, but here's the disclosures. They're blank. Basically, they weren't even really filled out. And they're like, yeah, here's our disclosures. What do I do in a situation like that?
Okay, I'm gonna come back to that because Dan had his hand raised and I'm hoping he touches on where I want to go.
Gee, that's a lot of pressure. So, I guess one thing, and you can confirm this whether to do this or not. One thing I always tell people is like, don't live in the gray when it comes to sellers' disclosures. Don't tell people like, well, I think there might be something, from the HOA coming down the pike that when there may or may not be, or like, or if they don't know if something is right or wrong with the property. Just like speak black or white, what you know or don't know, it is or it isn't. And then, so I'd love a comment on that. And then two is, what if lived experience differs from former owner's disclosure, right? Like, I don't know, for example, I'm making it up, but like a window well leaks, but like we've never seen it leak in the 3 years we lived here.
Okay. So these are all good questions. I'll see if I can surmise it, but let me start at the 30,000-foot view. If your client, your seller client says, well, I don't want to provide seller's disclosure, I never lived there. I think it's imperative for us as a good agent to say, hey, you know what? Before being in the industry, I would have the same position, but can I share with you something? This is like a standard dialogue we should be able to do in our sleep, right? Before I got in the industry, I would be thinking perhaps the same thing and maybe even embracing the same approach. But can I share something with you that you may be overlooking? What is 99% of the human population going to say? Yes, please share with me, right? And then I'm going to have some type of a conversation that says, you know what? Seller's disclosures are actually one of the best things to come along for a seller. And here's why. Sometimes people look at it as kind of cumbersome and they're exposing their stuff. Right now, a buyer, the carrot is in front of them. They want the house. And for all intents and purposes, unless there's something catastrophically wrong with the property, that's probably not going to change. So your opportunity as a seller right now to disclose things and get it documented and out in front of it really heads them off at the pass when a month in, 6 months, 12 months in, maybe the newness of the house is worn off and they're looking at it with a more critical eye, and you did your job and disclose things, right? So that's what most of the public doesn't understand, is this is a way to help you avoid future litigation, right? And if something comes up, we can negotiate through it in most cases. Specifically about the seller who doesn't want to disclose, this is what I ask agents this all the time. I'm like, you know what? How long has the seller owned the property? Well, mom and dad died, 2 months ago. So we've owned it, 2 months, or it's been in the trust for 2 months, or whatever the case may be. And then this is the box they always forget about. Check the box. We've never lived or occupied the property. Mom and dad did, but they've passed on, right? And that way it opens up the plausibility of whoever is the trustee to come in and say, no, for 99% of these. I don't know anything. I didn't live there. Nothing was disclosed to me because I wasn't the one that bought it. Mom and dad bought it, and right. And so
Yeah, but
sometimes,
as the inheritors of the property, don't they have a responsibility in selling the property to be able to figure out what problems there are and disclose those, which removes them liability in the future?
Time out. Their job is not to figure out or investigate and find problems. Seller's disclosure says you're to disclose what you know. There is no affirmative obligation to go and do your own inspection report as the seller, right? Because our REPC in its default says you're buying the property in its as-is condition. And then, of course, we all know there's section 8.1 that allows them to do any and all investigations, test verifications that they deem necessary. So I've had people, and it depends on the situation, but generally speaking, I've had some agents be like, well, I can have my sellers do an inspection report ahead of time. First of all, inspectors aren't licensed, so it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And once they put something in writing, whether it's right or wrong, because they have affiliate repair companies, right? That never happens. You might get a list of things that now is documented that may or may not be a real thing. So I tend to say, since the contract says you're buying it as is, and the obligation is clear that it's the buyers to do the investigation, testing, and verification, don't muck it up. Don't muck it up. And then as far as the survivors, the siblings who get the property, no, they don't have an obligation to go find things. And if something was disclosed to the parents, unless you have documentary proof of that, like a previous inspection report or an FHA appraisal or something like that, you, by checking these boxes here, I've never lived in the property, therefore I don't know, is that a truthful statement? It sure is. And lacking any other documentation, it's truthful still. Okay? So sometimes we want to be unnecessarily thorough, and we actually can gum it up a little bit. So just be careful. Understand what the obligation is, and the obligation is to disclose, and this is important on seller's disclosures, anything that the seller, the current seller or owner knows. What else? What's the other conditions? That materially affects the value or the condition of the property and is not readily discoverable by a buyer. Okay? So those are some important conditions to remember. All right, I got to get rattling on to cover the areas I wanted to really quickly here because we're rapidly running out of time. All right, this is a big one. We're not going through all these, just for the record, in case you're like, oh crap, he's going through 11 pages of seller's disclosures. No, I am not. In the state of Utah, if you were to venture a guess, Haley, how many people who have finished out their basement actually pulled permit with the city or county?
10% or fewer.
I think you're pretty accurate. And here's the interesting thing. How many of you guys have listed properties and haven't even asked the question, or as your sellers are filling out seller's disclosures and they're like, well, we did finish out the basement. It's okay for you to give them some steering on this to help, right? We're just seeing a little more litigation around this, right? If you have not disclosed, because look at what it says in 2AI. Were any permits issued? What do you do with that? You answer it honestly.
No.
It goes back to the carrot dangling in front of the buyer, right? We've all walked through a lot of houses, and the biggest tell in my book for whether something was permitted or not is the condition of the sheetrock and texture. You know it's a homeowner special when the orange peel texture, if you bump up against it, is not like a loofah and it takes off, you know, some dead skin. But even here's the part that a lot of agents don't know. If your seller says, yeah, no, we didn't pull a permit on that. Okay. That pretty much heads off a buyer coming back 3 months down the road and being like, well, the seller didn't get a permit. Goes back to 10-2, you're buying it as is, seller's disclosures. They told you that they didn't pull a permit. You had the opportunity to go to your local municipality. And I checked with 3 or 4 of them here in Utah County. Guess what they all do? They all will issue a retroactive permit if that's really of concern to the buyer. And guess how they do it? Let's see if anybody knows this one. Do they go in and tear the sheetrock off? No. Two different cities, Orem and Springville, told me, because I asked them, I said, so, okay, if I want to do a retroactive permit, how much does it cost? Oh, it costs the same amount as if you would have pulled the permit initially. So there's no like penalty phase or anything like that. And I said, so how do you verify the electrical and the plumbing and everything else? And this was the kind of the interesting part. Said the first thing our inspectors do is go and look at the quality of the finish. If it becomes obvious that, you know, it's a homeowner special, we're going to look at it with a more scrutinizing eye. But if we look, for instance, you know, down, what is it, 16, 18 inches, and every, you know, 7 or 8 feet, there's an electrical outlet, it's being done per code. And they actually have tools to see where the copper is in the wall, and they can kind of trace it and see if it was done according to spec. If they start seeing things weird and there's a missing GFCI or things like that, or consistently missing those things, they may do what they call an invasive inspection, which they will cut into, you know, a few spots in the wall to verify that things are a certain way. So I guess my point is, if we're representing a seller, and they ask a question about this, our answer should always be, well, answer it honestly. And then the second part of that is because which is because if it's significant to the buyer, their job in the contract is to do all test verifications that they deem necessary. So they can go down to the city, they can go see about getting a secondary permit or a retro permit. And that's clearly their responsibility. The worst thing you could do is say, yes, a permit was pulled when it wasn't. That is the absolute worst thing you can do. Because if there were structural problems with it, then you were deceptive and now there's a huge liability. Okay, does that make sense so far? So additions and remodels, make sure you're paying attention to that and helping your clients. All right, use of the property, not going to spend a ton of time here, but I've had a few over the past 2 years where people have said, yep, it's an approved ADU. It's an approved ADU. If you're representing a seller, the first question you should ask them is, do you have documentation that it's approved ADU, right, from the city? If they say no, I would be highly suspect, and therefore I would be communicating to them. I don't know if we want to communicate that until we get approval from the city. Most of the cities in the past 3 years have updated their code in regards to this. Probably going back 12, 14 years ago, Orem was really bad with ADUs. And we as the realtor organization went and convinced them it was a good thing for them to increase the rooftops, so to speak, the number of people in the city, because they were losing population. And they created a policy for approved ADUs. And theirs was more stringent than most. You had to have separate meters, gas and electric, and that gets a little cost prohibitive. I'll just use Springville and Mapleton, because that's where I live, and I've checked a few others. Most of them have updated to say, listen, if you got parking's a big deal. So, if you got the side of the house, RV parking, that will suffice. It's got to have its own entrance. It has to be owner occupied, right? At least one portion of the residence has to be owner occupied. And the common area or any connection between the ADU and the primary residence has to have a deadbolt locking door. Those aren't terribly stringent. And so just know when you're going out on those listings, or if you're representing a buyer, those are kind of the parameters, but the safe thing to do is always double check with the city, whether you're representing the seller or the buyer. Don't just, quite often we unwittingly give way too much credibility to what's on the listing. The listing is not contractual. If you're not familiar with this, when we're done today, go read section 14. Basically says doesn't matter what's in the listing, what's here in the contract is what governs. Do not put your faith in what's in the listing. Okay. All right.
So Matt, can you just remind me if they use the term non-conforming ADU, would that be that, if they've rented it maybe, but it's not permitted perhaps, or they don't have the licensure for it, but they've been receiving rents, would that non-conforming ADU be appropriate language?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. It's like, hey, listen, you're buying the property as is. We have tenants in the basement. We never got approved for it. It doesn't make it an illegal transaction. It just means you're going to potentially be sideways with the municipality, and I'm doing the appropriate disclosure. If you want to continue on as the buyer, right, you're to do all tests and verifications you deem necessary.
And do what you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Correct. And another euphemism for that is, I have a mother-in-law apartment who I happen to be renting out to somebody who's not part of my family. It's the same thing. The same thing. Okay. Scrolling down. The last ones I want to hit on, culinary water is not like typically a problem. It is when you get out into the county and you're using a well. And here's the part I wanted to make sure you're making sure your clients are filling out correctly. Make sure they have the name of the water company, the contact at the water company. If there are any shares in your possession, you need to provide documentation. Okay. And by the way, are they all paid for? It's really true in the same area of irrigation. if there's an irrigation company, a lot of the cities that provide culinary always also have pressurized irrigation. Yep, it's redundant. Why do we spend so much time making sure they have the contact info? Because it's a direct tie-in back to the REPSI, to where we facilitated giving them access to the critical organizations for water. And then once we've given them that information, and it's also true, where is the HOA? It's especially true. Oh my hell. Control F, HOA. There we go. Section 22. We have actually had a few of these in our company in the past few months in regards to the HOA. So I guess my ask for you is make sure either your client is filling this out right, these sections where you have a contact name and phone number and website. It takes so much of the responsibility off the seller and off of us, because they now have the pathway, meaning the buyers have a pathway to get in touch with the key people so that they can do the tests and verifications that they deem necessary, right? Seems really trivial. It's like super important. We had one down in St. George. It's actually still kind of ongoing, and it kind of demonstrates the problem here, both on the seller side and the buyer side. So I'm going to finish with this story and kind of get you guys to weigh in. So we represent the seller, and there was, I think the normal HOA was $135. Okay. And so that's what was put on the MLS. HOA, $135, you know, garbage and sewage and maintaining the landscaping. Apparently there was some, I can't remember what the item was, but in the complex, they needed to have a special assessment, which is an actual term in the contract, the REPSI, that got voted down by one vote. So there was no special assessment that was approved, right? So in the seller's disclosures, it says, are you aware of any special assessments? What do you correctly answer? Anyone? Participation sport? There is not a special assessment.
No special assessment. It was it's officially over.
Right. I mean, they talked about it. Our job, the contract doesn't say, hey, seller, you're to disclose if there were discussions about a special assessment. Your obligation under the contract is, were there any special assessments that were approved? And the answer was no. Now, here's where it gets muddy. So the HOA got creative and they said, well, since the membership didn't approve the special assessment, we're going to raise the HOA fee for a period of time to over $500. What's our obligation now as a seller? Is that readily discoverable by an ordinary prudent buyer? Yeah, see how this gets muddy really quickly?
Well, doesn't it say change of ownership fees or some sort of, well, no, I don't know. That's interesting, because I mean, I would be ticked if a seller didn't tell me and I had to find out on my own, right?
So yeah, and you're spot on, Dan. And this is exactly what happened. And you know what? I feel for the buyers on the other side, a younger couple. And the seller had actually paid a couple months of the higher HOA. But when he filled out his data input form, right, at the time the listing was taken, it was 135. Right. And so on the MLS, and I just showed you section 14, it doesn't matter what's on the MLS, it says 135. And the contract says you're to disclose any special assessments. Well, there weren't any special assessments, but the HOA did go up. And so I'm just painting an ugly picture for you guys as to what to pay attention to. After the fact, yeah, it becomes very clear, you know, we probably should have been more proactive in the communication of letting the buyer know that the HOA was higher. But guess what? We also did provide them. Section 22. Is there an HOA? What's the contact name? What's the phone number? Their job is to do all tests and verifications. The key word there is verifications, right? Verify the HOA is 135. Verify there are no special assessments. Verify. And guess what the buyer didn't do? They didn't
Verify.
verify.
Yeah.
So they go to settlement and sign off on settlement without any line items for any special assessments being paid, even though they knew there had been some discussion about special assessment, and they signed off and transferred the property. And after the fact, they're coming back saying the seller said he would pay this. And actually the seller said he would pay special assessments, which weren't voted for, right? And I had a conversation with the agent and the owner, and this is how it plays out. He said, listen, I thought this was all resolved. I mean, yes, we discussed 10 different things, right? And one of them happened to be special assessments, but it came back to us that it was voted down, therefore I wasn't on the hook. And I assumed since they went to closing and signed off on settlement statements that had no line item, that they're okay with that. And now it's 3 months later and they want me to cough up several $1,000s. I've spent the money.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
isn't the seller obligated to update their disclosures though if something changes?
They are, but is there a line item here for the HOA amount?
Matt, I have a question.
No, but even the information they gave when they filled out the listing is no longer accurate.
So here's this is where it gets, and Janet, I will come back to you in 2 seconds. Here's the interesting thing. The normal HOA, right? I mean, unfortunately, the HOA is playing a shell game. They got voted down on a special assessment. So they did a sleight of hand accounting trick and just said, oh, right, we're just going to raise the HOA, right, for 6 months till it's all paid off. So what is the HOA payment? Is it $500 a month or is it really $135? It's just temporarily, but and I totally get what you're saying, Don. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. And what is the buyer's responsibility to test and verify when they have complete access to the HOA? And they could have picked up the phone and said, hey, is the HOA payment $135? And what would the HOA have said? No, for the next 6 months, it's $500. So they kind of shirked not only their right, but their obligation to verify. I'm not giving the seller a free pass. After the fact, it would have been great if they would have just said, HOA currently 500, by December 1st, it will be back to 135 and have that all up front. Yep, that would have been ideal.
But in your scenario, he didn't really know that.
He didn't know. At the time he filled out the listing input form and put it on the MLS.
But before closing, he knew?
He did know because he had made 2 payments.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
Yeah. But where they hadn't come to an agreement and the contract, said he's only obligated to pay special assessments and the special assessment was voted down, there was technically no contractual obligation to pay it. And so he just figured, well, the buyers must be okay. They're going to pay it. And that's known as making an assumption. We know the problems with assumptions. I think everybody on this call would agree the best path would have been to get that information out in front, but I can see the plausible path of how it got to where it was. And at the end, then both seller and buyer making assumptions. Buyer signed off on settlement statements without a credit for those payments. So that's on them. Seller signed off, even though he had communicated he'd be willing to pay a special assessment, but since it was voted down, he just assumed that the buyers were going to be okay paying it. So there was 2 assumptions, one on each side, and they're both bad. And, hindsight's wonderful. Just be aware of stuff. And the sooner and the more clarity you can get out in front of something, the better. Janet, you had a question.
I was just going to say, shouldn't that have showed up in the HOA meeting minutes? And I know those are hard to get.
You know what?
We
actually did get a copy. After this closed, a couple of months after, they sent us a copy of HOA minutes and a letter from the HOA saying, yes, there was a special assessment put forward and it was voted down.
Wow.
So the buyers had access to that information, and they, no offense, but they just assumed that the seller was going to be, you know, upstanding guy and just part with his money because he's a good dude. Well, whose fault is it? I think there's culpability on both sides. But when you get down to brass tacks contractually, it's on the buyer predominantly. If you want to look at comparative liability, right? I'm not advocating that we follow a seller like, you know, in that situation. I think all of us on this call, if we were involved in that, we'd be like, hey, we need to get out in front of this prior to closing. Let's share the information so that we don't have 3 months down the road people threatening litigation. So that's a good reminder for this call. It's not what you can get away with, it's what can you head off by doing it right in advance. And so that's what I wanted to finish on. So anytime you see in the HOA, anytime you see in the seller's disclosures, whether it's the HOA, the water district, culinary, irrigation water, where you can provide the appropriate organization's contact information, it will serve you well. So even though we give the seller's disclosures to the seller to fill out, our fiduciary reasonable care is to go back through them. And if we saw that information missing or blank before we send it over to the other side, we should be back in touch with our sellers going, hey, this will serve you well if we can track down that information and include it in the copy we send. Okay? Done.
Back to my point, it does say right there in section 22B, how much is the payment? So
Yep.
why didn't they update that? There should be a spot, isn't there a spot on this one that says update any information from the time you listed it?
Yeah, at the very end. Yep.
So I think it comes back on the seller.
Yeah.
They didn't update it.
Yep. And you know what, Don? Here's the crazy thing. I really am not trying to argue the point. I'm just trying to point out there are a number of ways to figure out. So again, in the REPSI itself, if we go to section 8.1, right? This section right here. Buyer's due diligence shall consist of the buyer's review and approval of the context of the seller's disclosures and any other tests, evaluations, and verifications of the property deemed necessary or appropriate to the buyer. So there's a affirmative obligation for the buyer to verify information, right? That's why I say there's culpability on both sides of this. But when you get to settlement, this is an important thing for us to remember as professionals. Unless there's a section that says this shall survive closing, when we go and sign the settlement documents and it closes, this REPSI gets replaced with the new deed of trust. That becomes the new contract. And you have essentially deemed that you're okay with it unless somebody has intentionally misled. And I'm just saying your ability to test and verify the information that was provided is going to be an interesting point to debate.
Well, why even have the seller fill it out if they're not going to fill it out accurately? You can always say, well, it was up to the buyer to make sure we weren't lying.
Yeah. Well, here's a good example, just a simple example. If the seller said, no, I've never had a leak. I've never had a leak in the roof. Right. And then the buyers move in and there's a leak in the roof and you can see existing water stains and stuff like that. That is not readily discoverable. I mean, a buyer doesn't typically climb up in the crawl space in the attic and look for water stains on the trusses. And so I know exactly what you're saying, Don, and I hope everybody on this call understands. I'm trying to tell this group, when you work with your sellers, tell them to disclose as much as possible, right? But don't forget, if you're representing the buyers, don't put complete faith and trust by itself in the seller's disclosures, because that verbiage in section 8.1 is pretty powerful contractually. And we've dealt with this. I just was down in small claims down in St. George dealing with this same concept, where the buyer didn't do her due diligence and she wanted to then point the finger at everybody else. And literally she bought the property sight unseen without doing investigation. So there's the two extremes of the spectrum. Okay. So if you're representing the buyer, make sure they do their due diligence. If you're the seller, encourage them to be as thorough as possible. Okay.
Well, I think Dan's point or Don's point is really good though, too, because if, you know, that seller, there wasn't a leak when they filled these out and then he lived with that leak for 2 months and didn't update his disclosures. You know, I really see, you know, Don's point of view on this too. I think the seller made a mistake on that.
I don't disagree,
Yeah.
but the difference between a leak in the roof versus the HOA, I can pick up the phone call. Is that reasonable for a buyer to do? Is it readily discoverable by a buyer to pick up the phone and call? Yeah.
Might be
Not-
a little bit easier to discover that than potentially a leak.
For sure. And that's kind of my point.
Yeah,
And
but if
that's
the
what-
seller had made 2 payments at the higher amount, he
That's
knew
true,
what had been
too.
disclosed on the MLS was wrong.
Is everybody clear? I'm not championing the seller's point here. I'm not advocating what the seller did. I'm just saying.
Just the magic that Matt Barton can do for you.
No, it's absolutely right. It's the buyer's job to verify it all.
It is.
It just, the
so
buck
let's-
stops with the
let's
buyer.
agree to wrap up the call on this. Strongly advocate for your sellers to disclose as much as possible. Don't hide behind, you know, this, that, or the other. I just got to deal with it after the fact. I didn't have the ability to change it prior to. And my job is to explain what the buyer's obligation and the seller's obligation was and see if people want to try and mend fences and make something better. And I think we're there. So you guys are great. Good discussion. I love it when we have, you know, some back and forth. And this is like so many things in our industry. We want to think it's clear cut. And depending on how we run our business, we can make it more clear cut. But there's always some elements that cannot be completely anticipated or controlled. So keep doing a great job. I hope you have a great Veterans Day. Thank you for being on the call. And don't forget Dan and Aaron's training on SOI tomorrow. It's going to be fantastic.
See y'all then.
All right.
Thanks,
Have a good
Matt.
one, guys. See ya.